Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. It's June the 25th, day 176, and we're in 2 Chronicles chapter 16. We're going to talk about King Asa. And so I'll just read a couple of verses and then we can talk about it. It says, in the 36th year of Asa's reign, King Baasha of Israel invaded Judah and fortified Ramah in order to prevent anyone from entering or leaving King Asa's territory in Judah. Asa responded by removing the silver and gold from the treasuries of the temple of the Lord and the royal palace. He sent it to King Ben-Hadad of Aram, who was ruling in Damascus, along with this message: let there be a treaty between you and me like the one between your father and my father. See, I am sending you silver and gold. Break your treaty with King Baasha of Israel so that he will leave me alone. So the previous two chapters that we're not talking about talk about Asa's willingness to do what God wanted him to do. Like he created these religious reforms. He turned the people of Israel or Judah back to God, serving God. He got rid of idols. You know, he does all of these great things. And then he gets to this point where he's had some success, and then Israel invades Judah. And that's an unusual thing for us to read itself, because we think of them as one nation. But they're divided. Israel it has invaded Judah. And his response is not to seek God and see what he wants. His response is to approach a king who has a treaty with Israel, who I'm assuming is a part of maybe this fighting, and says, here, I'm going to take the silver and gold from the temple, and I'm going to make this treaty with you. I want you to break your treaty with him and make a treaty with me. It seems to me up until this point, so I'm having to backtrack. We don't do this all the time, but I'm having to backtrack. Up until this point, he's trusted God, asked God what he wanted him to do, tried to do the right thing. But he's had some success, and now, instead of asking God, he comes up with this ingenious plan of his own to try to solve a problem that he believes that he has. Why is it that after a little bit of success, we begin to depend on ourselves and our own ingenuity instead of continually relying on God?
For some reasons, quote, success tends to change our thought processes. It makes us vulnerable. We've talked about it numerous times. It's risky to be, quote, successful and blessed, because there is this tendency to think, well, I did it, or I've been successful in the past, God's blessed me, it'll happen again. You would think that it would drive us just the opposite. We'd be more humble, more dependent on God, seeking him, but it's just our natural tendency to begin to believe that it's going to continue this way, or that I can figure this out now because I've got to this point in my life.
Cheryl?
I think we want to take credit for things that we shouldn't be taking credit for.
Yeah, I think that is a trap for everybody. That somehow we believe it was us that did it. Or if it hadn't have been for us, God couldn't have done it. We may not go as far as to say we did it, but, look, God used me, know. Right. And, I'm not sure that that's the case. I think I've probably seen my own self in that trap before. The older I get, I think the less. It's interesting. I see these kings, the older they get, they do the stupid stuff. For me, it seems to be, at least in my life. I hope the older I get, it don't turn on me again. That's what I'm hoping. But most of the stupid things in my younger years, look, I was able to do this. But I realize today that if it weren't for God, like there's just so many things that wouldn't happen.
Yeah, he made such a shift here from what he had done previously, all those years prior, and the steps that he had made, he goes from depending on God and seeking God to making decisions on his own. He diverts resources
From the temple.
From the temple.
Yeah.
That's God's stuff and God's money, in order to send it to a king who's already demonstrated his willingness to sell himself at the highest bidder, to put confidence in a king. But I mean, think of it this way: if the king, and he changes his mind, he's going to break a treaty that he's already had, a promise, a covenant with another king, to come over on your side because there's enough gold and silver. What makes you think he's going to be loyal to you when he gets a better offer somewhere else down the line? And I'm like, how far can you go, and how can it happen? At least what appears to be so suddenly.
Yeah, it probably isn't so
Yeah.
suddenly, but I think there may be a couple of things driving this. The king that he's approaching has a treaty with the person that's invading him, and he seems like, maybe if I can get him on my side, if I can get them, I see people do this all the time. If I can get them
Yeah.
to see it my way,
It will
this
shift
one
the
person,
power to
it'll
me.
change
Yeah,
everything.
change my
It's just
circumstance.
so, I don't know. It's not well thought out. That's
Yeah.
the way I would say it. So verse 7 through 9, it says, at that time, Hanani, the seer, came to King Asa and told him, because you have put your trust in the king of Aram instead of the Lord your God, you missed your chance to destroy the army of the king of Aram. So he's made a treaty with the person that God was going to let him beat.
Yep.
He says, don't you remember what happened to the Ethiopians and Libyans and their vast army with all the chariots and charioteers? At that time you relied on the Lord, and he handed them over to you. The eyes of the Lord search the whole earth in order to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. What a fool you have been. From now on you will be at war. He apparently forgets that God... Why is it so easy for us to forget what God has done? Sometime since we've been in this room, Sheryl, you mentioned how blessed you are, that... And I'm going through an exercise right now myself. Why is it so easy to forget the good things God has done for us?
We become expectant that things are going to continue to be that way. And again, I guess we begin to feel like we can take credit for some of that. I've earned this money, whatever the case may be. That we somehow think we have more control than we do, or that we're wiser than we are, when God's blessed us with so much.
Some of that, I think, is time lapse has gone by that we may legitimately forget because we've not been intentional about recalling. We've spent a lot of time in here talking about remembering things and recording, which is helpful to go back to be able to look and see, and because he gets very specific when he reminds Asa here, the Ethiopians and the Libyans and that vast army. And apparently it appears that perhaps this was a bigger group of people than what he's facing now, dealing with. Yeah, and he said, you came to me and relied on me, and I just handed them over to you. He's like, what's changed?
Yeah.
Which would kind of make you think it's his faith.
Yeah, and you don't... Gosh, if I have a goal right now, like a simple goal, it's to finish well. Whatever I'm doing right now, like if I can just finish well, like if my job here at the church, if I can finish well, for my life as a person here on this earth, if I can finish well. But people stumble at the end. How I don't know. It's disheartening to me to see somebody who's lived such a godly life and at the end seem to trail away.
Yeah, we're going to see a little bit of that attitude
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
in
Just a minute.
In just a minute, his response.
Well, verse 9, I want to come back to. It says, the eyes of the Lord search the whole earth in order to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. What does a partially committed heart look like? That's what I want to know. And can you describe either a partially committed heart or a fully committed heart? What does that look like to you?
I guess he must have been partially committed. Or maybe he was reminding him this is why
that he used to be fully
That's
committed.
right, as far as you have, because you were fully committed and now you've been a fool.
Yeah, I think it's literally where you intentionally decide that every aspect of my life is going to come under the sovereignty of God and what pleases Him and what He, to the best of my ability, the instructions that I have, the knowledge that I have, that I'm going to try to live my life in such a way, on a personal level, as a husband, as a father, as a community leader, a pastor, whatever the case may be, that every aspect, how I handle my finances, are going to come under His jurisdiction. That it is fully committed to Him in every aspect. That there's not a part of my life that I say is off limits. This is mine. I'll control this. I don't need you in this. Don't want you in this. I'll deal with this my own way.
Yeah, I have come to believe, especially this year. Maybe other times I kind of knew it, but this year I've become more convinced of it, that the advantage David had that everybody didn't have was his heart. He wasn't perfect. He did some really stupid stuff. He cost the lives of thousands of people. But it was his heart, and whenever he was addressed, his heart would turn back to God. Like he didn't have that rebellion like Solomon did. He didn't have that rebellion like Asa does. And a heart that is fully committed to God is not somebody who is perfect. A heart that's fully committed to God, when they realize they've made the error, turns to Him naturally. It's like that kid, I think you've described your kids. If you just looked at them, they just fell to pieces. Like their heart was, I want to please you. I want to do what's right. The other one was like, gave you the middle finger kind of.
Well, they knew better than do the second step, but sometimes the eye got them in trouble too. But
yeah, but I mean, with their eye, that's what they were doing.
Yeah,
that's what I meant, And I think it's that. I think the heart fully committed to God is willing in the moments where we hear. A heart fully committed to God would have said, I'm sorry. Yeah. You're right. I shouldn't have depended on Him. What do I need to do?
Yeah. To fix
what
this.
Steps do I... That's what David does. Yeah. What steps do I need to take to make this right? But verse 10 says, Asa became so angry with Hananiah for saying that he threw him into prison and put him in stocks. At that time, Asa also began to oppress some of his people. Why do we get angry with people who tell us the truth?
I don't want to hear it. Or take responsibility for it,
right.
Or make any changes.
Yeah, rather than accepting responsibility and acknowledging it seems that it's easier for us to get angry or deflect toward that person.
How dare they?
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Don't you see all I've done?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and you're judgmental, self-righteous, all those things when you're just speaking truth to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's difficult initially to take truth. I'll speak for myself. It's difficult. Like sometimes that initial confrontation, I'm like, yeah, you know what, you're right. But most of the time, it's like, all right, let me block for a minute, so I can figure out what's going on. But usually if I walk away and think about it, I come to the understanding. His response wasn't that. His response wasn't, let me reflect on this and see if I can get better. Not only did he put Hananiah in prison, he begins to take it out on other people as well. And I think we have got to, if we're going to be people with a heart for God, since we were talking about David a few minutes ago, the similar scenario happens with David when Nathan, a couple of times, Nathan, says, hey, this isn't right. David's response wasn't, who do you think you are? He was like, Lord, forgive me. And I think we have to have a repentant heart when we're confronted with the truth. And that's difficult to do.
So I have a question. Based on verse 10, and we see Asa's response of anger, toward the prophet and to other people. Do you think there would be something we could draw from that people who are constantly angry at other people, that are constantly blaming other people, have had a time and season in their life where they were confronted with right or wrong, and they made choice not to change or do the right thing, and they just constantly are living a life of bitterness that spills over to other people?
I would agree with that. I think in my own life there have been times where people suffered because I was mad about something else.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I wasn't mad at them. Mm-hmm. They just ended up getting the
had
fire.
To be in the way.
Right, yeah. And I think that's some of what's going on here. And I think people who are perpetually angry, perpetually bitter, have unresolved issues in their life that they haven't dealt with. And until you do, you can't resolve that. You can never find a way to come down. So the story goes on. This is I don't want to say it's funny. It's somewhat sad, to be honest with you. It says, the rest of the events of Asa's reign from beginning to end are recorded in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. In the 39th year of his reign, Asa developed a serious foot disease. Yet even with the severity of the disease, he did not seek the Lord's help, but turned only to physicians. He still chose, he's got a foot disease. That's funny to me. Like, apparently it's a severe foot disease because it's going to kill him. And we don't know what kind of foot disease he had. But in those moments, often we'll pray. It is hard. This passage is difficult for me to read. It frankly is heartbreaking to see a man who had created such religious reforms for this country get to the end of his life, and his heart is so hardened that when he's sick, he can't even pray to God to help him. How do our hearts get so hardened? What is the pathway to a hardened heart?
I think it's systematic. It's repetitive. We have used the term before. You cross that line, point of no return, as it were, and then you just become rebellious to the point you refuse to give in. I see this serious foot disease that he developed. I see this as a gift from God that he sent to him to humble him, or give him the opportunity to be humble, to come to his senses, maybe to make a different decision, to repent, to change. And even that didn't get his attention. He just continued on.
Cheryl, how do you?
I agree. I think it's incremental.
It don't happen overnight.
No, you don't just wake up and say, I'm going to be stubborn and turn my back on God today.
It's like putting, I don't know, my mom would have called it shellac, but there's other words for it. When you're putting varnish on a piece of furniture, you have to put multiple coats. And the more coats you put, the harder it gets. Same thing with resin. Yeah. The more coats you put, the harder it gets. Rarely is the first disobedience the thing that hardens our heart. I'm not saying it can't be, but rarely is it. It's, that constant, rejection. And Jay, you alluded to something, and I've had this conversation recently on a couple of accounts. People are going, they're talking about situations in their life and how devastating, difficult it is. And I said, you might need to stop and view it as a gift. It might just be an opportunity God's giving you. This foot disease might have been an opportunity for him one more time to pray to God, but he chose not to. And it's sad to watch. So, any other things you guys wanted to mention out of this passage that we didn't talk about?
It's just a serious wake-up call, this whole story of Asa. Just because we start out well and have done well for a long time doesn't mean we finish well if we're not focused and determined.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the beautiful stories of Scripture, and thank you for the ones that are difficult to read, the ones that bring some levity to helping us understand that just because we've been spiritual doesn't mean we will always be spiritual. Just because we followed you doesn't mean we'll always follow you. There has to be some intentionality. Help us, God, not to wane away, to allow our hearts to be hardened to a place that we cannot call on you. Help us, Lord, to be able to depend on you in the successful times and the difficult times. Help us, Lord, to do what you would have us to do in Jesus' name.